Welcome back to the weekend show. You're now tuned in to the political segment. Our topic today is fundamental human rights. As you remember, we discussed this last week and we thought it necessary to continue this discussion in today's program. Joining us to discuss the issues of fundamental human rights in Nigeria, we have
with us written in the studio, Tonye Isokariari. I got it right today,
Yes,
yeah?
you did.
He is a Government Relations Advisor and a public sector analyst. Welcome back to the weekend show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Also back on the weekend show, we have Martin Obono, who is the team lead of TAP Initiative. Welcome back. You've done a lot of work in this space this year, so it's good to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
welcome, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Tonye. I'm not quite sure if you caught up with the program last week, but we were discussing about the fundamental human rights issues we're facing in the country. Can you tell me from your own perspectives, what can we do to continue to promote fundamental human rights in Nigeria, given the fact what just happened in the U.S. House of Representatives? We saw democracy at work. Although some Trump Make America Great supporters will beg to differ, but we saw them really utilize their fundamental human rights and, exercise their democracy to its full extent. So how can we apply that here in Nigeria? And how can the government be more sensitive to the fundamental human rights of Nigerians?
Thank you. So we're looking at advocacy, right? I think that we need to do a lot more of that in terms of bringing some of these fundamental issues or fundamental rights issues to the front burner so that people actually know their rights. We were just having a conversation before we got in here, and with somebody else, he was saying that he was stopped by certain one of the the forces, police forces, or the law enforcement agencies, and they said to them that they were supposed to search him, and he said, no, before you search me, I have to search you. A lot of people don't know that. So it's like we need to do a lot of advocacy for people to know, first of all, what are my rights. Once people understand what their rights are, then we can now begin to question some of the things that have been happening over time. So, first of all, we've been largely governed by, the military. So there's a lot of things that, it's going to take a lot of time for us to, do away with, basically. And I think that's why advocacy is very important. If you're trying to bring, the American situation into our present conversation or into what's going on here in Nigeria, it shows that a lot of people, there are different sides. And it's okay to have different sides. Mm-hmm. That's what actually develops our democracy. It's okay for people to differ in various areas, but in that, in having, divergent views and all that, let's ensure that our rights are being, enshrined properly and respected, because that is like what the common man, that's the only thing the common man holds to himself. So how do people begin to know these rights? We need to do a lot of advocacy and let people know. A lot of people do not know, so they don't even know that their rights are being trampled upon. Then also, we need to also ensure work, as collaboratively as a group, or when certain rights are being abused, we need to call it out. Whether you are supporting, whoever is, trampling on the person's right or not, that shouldn't come to play. What is right is somebody's right is being trampled upon, and how can we come together to point it out and ensure that it doesn't happen again?
So I understand where Tonye is coming from, but I want to disagree a little by throwing this to Martin, in the sense that this has been a year of outrage. We've seen people identify problems, talk about it over and over again. It's become national issues. So for instance, like Showore being detained, whatever the reason being, but we've seen people talk about it. We saw the Abuja raid on women and how people spoke against it. We've seen the End SARS campaign, but Nigerians are also at a point where accountability, like we've seen in the US, where someone's being held responsible for his action. How many law enforcement officers, for instance, with the End SARS situation, how many SARS officials did we see actually being punished for what they have done? With the DSS raiding the courts last week, where there's a video of Femi Falana saying they apologized to the courts. What has happened within the whole structure? And so even if we have this advocacy, how do Nigerians actually hold these people accountable for infringing on their human rights? To maybe make examples of them which would act as a deterrent.
Thanks for the question. I think fundamentally the issue has to do with responsibility to act and the citizens' rights to push back, right? If you look at all the things you've mentioned, all the examples that you've given, you realize that, okay, let me even give and start with the courts, for example. I think Justice Ojukwu lost a very big opportunity in terms of respect for the courts and judiciary when she did not hold all those DSS guys in contempt of court. If I were her, at that point, I would hold them for contempt of court. Because in courts, for example, you see people, children playing football or even adults playing football close to the court's premises, and once they give a warning to say you're disturbing the peace of the courts, the next thing the judge remands them in prison, custody for maybe a month for contempt of court. So if I were her, that was a big opportunity that was lost in terms of respect of the sanctity of courts and even court orders. That was an opportunity we missed. So essentially, on a broader perspective, I think citizens need to learn to push back. And we need to push back to the point where governments know that there are consequences for their actions. And like Tonye said, if you continue having this, there's just that level of people not wanting to dissociate themselves from whoever they support. So the fact that I love President Buhari does not mean that if he's doing something wrong, I should support him, right? You have to stand up and speak because your turn might come. Also, there are times where people need to learn to understand that human rights are your birthright. They are your rights fundamentally. And when somebody, because people just say human rights and they don't tend to stop to think about what human rights is. These are the rights that make you human. They are the rights that differentiate you from a human, from being an animal and a human being or a thing. So if somebody takes away that rights, they are dehumanizing you. They are giving you a different type of rights, maybe an animal rights that do not belong to you. So we need to begin to have that self-consciousness to know that this is what makes me me, and you cannot take me away from me by not respecting my rights. And the government also needs to understand something. So you see, when the US refused to sell us arms, they gave a reason. They were like violations of rights and all that. There was a US Department of Justice report on human rights, very, very appalling, that talks about how Nigeria's human rights index is. There is the Amnesty International report on human rights. There is Human Rights Watch report on human rights. And none of them speaks well of Nigeria's rights, as in human rights in Nigeria. Because people who perpetrate violations or who carry out violations are not brought to book. You look at the Northeast, for example, of Operation Lafia Dole. The people who have carried out extrajudicial killings have not been brought to book, majority of them. You look at Operation Python Dance in the Northeast, in the Southeast, nothing has happened. You look at the various violations of the Nigerian police force in terms of torture, inhuman treatment of people in the process of administration of criminal justice. None of them has been brought to book. The other day, the DCP in Lagos tweeted a picture of a criminal with a gun, a suspect with a gun. And the guy was bruised, face everywhere. And I asked him a question. The Constitution guarantees that even a suspect has rights. Why do you have to brutalize this man to this point?
And most times
why
you
do
take
you
off their
have to
clothes.
dehumanize him as well? It is the courts that should, proven until innocent until proven guilty.
But Martins, let me jump in here. We understand that education is at the core of these violations of human rights. We also understand that a lack of accountability is also at the core of this issue, the continuous perpetration of violation against Nigerians' human rights. However, we've seen educated people, we've seen exposed people who have had their human rights abused and violated, and the public has come out to protest against their abuse, and yet the government is not listening. So what do we do? How do we respond to an issue like that? Are we going to keep trending hashtags for years to come? Are we going to keep protesting for years to come? What then? What are the next practicable steps that we can take to ensure that this stops?
Okay, so for me, I feel nothing comes easy. So we need to keep pushing. We can't just take one action and expect that. So for example, the NSAS trended for a very long time before the vice president set up a committee and all that too. So we need to basically continue to push back. You know, nobody will give you, so it's your right, but then the government is not willing to give you those rights because it's also expensive for them. They want to use those rights to check people and make citizens subjects. And we must continue to push back to the point where citizens have those rights and continue to have those rights, to enjoy those rights. Then secondly, there are various regional bodies where people can seek redress. So for example, there is an African Court on Human and People's Rights. So if your rights are violated in Nigeria, and Nigeria is signatory to that, and you feel that you can't get justice here, you go to the ECOWAS court.
But we've seen even the ECOWAS court give judgments that have been disregarded by the Nigerian government. And so when we talk about that, where the Nigerian government just says, you know what, we've heard you, but this is our sovereignty, and you can't play with it. And so it makes me question another arm of government, which is the National Assembly. Just a week ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, the chairman on human rights was in the news for wanting to sponsor a bill seeking for a single 6-year term for governors and presidents, as opposed to dealing with these issues of human rights, which has been on the front burner, especially in the last 2 months. How can we hold our legislators accountable and responsible for them to fight for us, because they are meant to be our representatives? Tonye.
Trying to answer a little of what you asked earlier, there's a lot of mutual suspicion between people, because we've been divided. Before we thought we were just divided based on the religious lines, but we've seen that it's gone deeper than that right now. It's no longer religious or ethnic now. It's now again, between party lines or between preference lines and all that.
Between the rich and the poor.
Between the rich and the poor. So there's a lot of mutual suspicion. So when you talk about somebody, an educated person's right being trampled upon, and a few group of people come together, somebody will quickly go behind and say, oh, this group is sponsored by XYZ, and it becomes, mutual suspicion. And that's why I said earlier that we need to, first of all, as Nigerians, decide, okay, you know what, this is our country. We want to actually make it work. And everything that happens affects everybody. It started from, this group, and this group said, oh, I'm not involved, I don't want to get involved, then he reached them. And it starts from there. So I think we need to start looking at the country as a whole and say, you know what, we need to salvage this country, and begin to work towards that. So if a government decides that they want to make its citizens subjects, then we can begin to voice out and say, you know what, we wouldn't accept that. And people within that same system should be able to say, you know what, this is not what I signed up for, and I'm ready to step back. That's why a lot of people, talked about, the vice president, for instance. A lot of people said, you know what, if you're going to be going through all these things, why don't you step back? And we know the dynamics of all that. However, people need to be able to speak out and speak up and come together and advocate together. Now, the National Assembly, going to National Assembly, unfortunately, the political landscape that brings these people into power needs to, we need to go back to it. And, I find it laughable because some people come up and say, oh, the National Assembly. Then I ask them, I say, did you vote in the last election? And they say, no. I say, okay, the person that the person doesn't really have any responsibility towards you. Because if I voted for somebody and the person decides that he's not doing what he's supposed to do, then I will go to his office and shout. I remember when the social media bill, and I tweeted about it, I said, I called my senator, I'm coming to meet him. And both coming to his office, and I'm coming with a group because I voted for you. So I will have a right, and if for any reason my right is being trampled, I can shout, I can speak up because I voted for you. But if you sit down and a very few numbers of people actually partake, in the elections and everything, and a particular crop of people come into National Assembly, then the whole of Nigeria is now shouting National Assembly. You didn't vote for them.
I think the election is the first step, but them now being in the National Assembly, I think they now have a duty. They're now duty bound to their constituents to ensure that they're providing legislation that are beneficial to the majority of Nigerians. But my question, my question here is the capacity of these legislators. We've laughed about several debates that have held on the floor of both the Senate and of the House of Representatives. You see legislators who don't sound very educated. They don't sound, like they know what they're talking about. And we laugh about it.
Even the standard of entry already is at bare minimum.
Exactly.
So you can't give what you don't have. So it comes back to the roots of the matter. You can't give what you don't have. If, a guy who is just on the streets and, a thug or something finds himself in the National Assembly, what do you expect him to do? He's going to do, So will a practical
solution then be to focus on building the capacity of these legislators as a solution to the perpetration of human rights violations going on in the country? Is that a practical solution?
So it will be one of the solutions because at that time, when you're already a legislator, that means there's absolutely no time. You just got 4 years to do all your research and all that. So capacity building might also take a longer time before you realize there will be an election year and you will want to run back. So the solution I probably will be pushing forward will be checkmate the entry points, right? What are the minimum standards that are expected for you to be a legislator, right? You need education, what level of education you need to show and demonstrate certain qualities, Maybe then we can begin to talk about the amendment of the Electoral Act to accommodate those thresholds that you need to have. Because in the real sense, you can't do SAC, for example, in the 2015 elections that threw up some set of legislators that we had and we still have. It was just that as far as you are a Buhari supporter, and your APC, sack anything PDP and bring in these guys. And there was someone I know, in all honesty, who was not in his village or in his constituency. He just bought the form and was in Lagos. And he won the election. He's in the House of Reps. He won the re-election still, and he's in the House of Reps. He wasn't even prepared for anything. It was just that vote APC from top to bottom. And that's how we have this guy in the legislature without knowing exactly what to do. Start running helter-skelter to seek support here and there. So at that point, we need to check the entry point. First of all, obviously, capacity building is very important, and support for legislative aids also, because the legislator doesn't need to know everything, but he needs to have competent people who are supporting him as legislative aids. And at that point, or him or her, at that point, we can now probably work up something. Also, I think citizens, we need to push. Nigerians need to push.
We're very docile.
We are too docile. We need to begin to push. So if your legislator is not representing you, if your legislator is not saying what is right, tell him we are waiting for you in the village. Come. There is another election coming. So people need to begin to take governance seriously and understand that governance affects them as well. So your legislator is in Abuja pushing a bill that will trample on your rights. Call him and tell him, send a note through his legislative aides or whoever. Write them letters. People need to begin to take these things personal, because it's, I was telling someone the other day, I said something as minute as sending a text message to your phone for your account balance is being debated in the UK Parliament. Here in Nigeria, MTN will just wake up, or see any of the banks will just wake up and do that.
I want to add something real quick. Sorry for cutting you short, Martin. So there's the people part, but there's also institutions. Institutions are constantly being weakened. So we have the ICPC, we have EFCC to perform their own functions, but we also have like a National Human Rights Commission, where most of whatever comes out from there appears to be a suggestion. how can we, Tonye, strengthen institutions to actually hold these people responsible, the National Assembly and the Executive and even the Judiciary? We have institutions already set up. Every day there's one commission being set up or the other, but how can they actually be strengthened?
These institutions, like I always say, like I say to people, we have laws, right? Laws are very, if the law, if they want to use the law against you, you know that we have laws, right? So the problem is not that we don't have those laws. The problem is the the the, the capacity and the wherewithal to say, you know what, these people handling these positions should actually drive these things. We had someone like Dora come to change the whole landscape of what NAFDAC is doing or was doing at the time. We had, other people. There's a lady presently in NAPTIP who is also changing.
Julie Donnelly.
Julie doing
We
what-
also saw with Peter when
Yes,
Sharon Ikezo
yes.
was the executive
We
secretary.
have the Sharon Ikezo. So we've had people. So come what Martin said, Nigerians need to know that this governance thing would affect everybody. So whatever role or responsibility you find yourself in, take it more seriously. And we should be able to call them out. We should be able to start calling. That's why we have social media anyway. We should call these people out. If you find out somebody is doing something wrong, or somebody is not doing what he's supposed to do. I know when I see certain issues on trafficking in persons or abuse or persons, being abused or whatever, I always tag NAPTIP to it a lot of times, and they respond, and you see they follow up. So we also need to also let them, because they can't be everywhere. Policing is done by everybody. So if they don't know, sometimes they don't have enough manpower to do everything. So we as citizens, we have a responsibility to play. A lot of times, to round up, we take, citizens always push responsibilities to government. We're always quick to push that responsibility to government and say, look, the government is not doing this, government is not doing that. But what are you doing in that little confined space that you are in to actually create that change? And coming back to human rights, how are we advocating and saying, you know what, this is what we're supposed to do, and this is what we're not supposed to do, and how do we entrench that?
I think that's a fine place to leave it. Thank you so much, Tonye. Thank you so much, Martins. The conversation definitely continues, but on behalf of the Weekend Show, we just want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. We'll take a short break. When we return, we have some talented singers that are going to get us into the Christmas mode. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back on the Weekend Show.
Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night when our dear Savior's born. Oh, long live the word and sing an air of pining till he appeared and the soul felt his word. Oh, a thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices beyond the praise. A new and glorious morning fall on your knees. Oh, hear the angels' voices. Oh, night divine. Oh, night when Christ was born.